Wednesday, April 8th. Hopefully everyone is having a good day. I'm going to go over some news that happened in 1960. That was important news of that day. And we're going to start out with some major news stories. Includes U.S. enters Vietnam War. The IRA starts its fight against the British. John F. Kennedy wins presidential election. Chubby Checker and the Twist start a new dance craze. Soviet missile shoots down the U.S. U-2 spy plane. Aluminum cans used for the first time. The U.S. announces its 3,500 American soldiers are going to be sent to Vietnam. Xerox introduces the first photocopier. Fidel Castro nationalizes American oil, sugar, and other U.S. interests in Cuba. OPEC, which stands for Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, is formed. So we're going to start out with the cost of living in the 1960s, and these numbers are really information that's great. How much did things cost in 1960? The yearly inflation rate for U.S. was 1.46%. Yearly inflation rate for the UK, which is the United Kingdom, was 1.1%. Average cost of a new house in 1960 was $12,700. An average monthly rent was just $98 a month. Cost of a gallon of gas was 25 cents a gallon. A 23-inch television was $219.95. Average cost of a new car was $2,600. Piaggio Vespa scooter was $319. A can of beef ravioli was 30 cents. A loaf of bread was 20 cents. And men's electric shaver was $20.30. A Polaroid land camera, looking back it seems quite expensive, but this was the only way to see your photo nearly instantly, was $93 back in 1960. The latest in Danish contemporary furniture. For the 60s home Danish, below are some prices. For the UK, guides in pounds, sterling average house price was $25.30. In 1960, the Cold War continued to become colder as the two sides, distrusting the other more than tried to influence other parts of the world. John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson won the presidency with one of the smallest margins in history, 113,000 votes out of 68.3 million. The sexual revolution of the 60s had begun with the use of birth control pills and Hugh Hefner opening the first of his Playboy clubs in Chicago. The Flintstones is shown on television for the first time, and movies of this year include The Magnificent Seven, Psycho. Notable technical achievements include the invention of the laser and a heart pacemaker. France tests its first atomic bomb and joins those countries with nuclear bomb technology. Notable names that appear in the limelight that year include Cassius Clay and Sir Francis Chichester. The U.S. sends the first troops to Vietnam following the French withdrawal in 1954 and the fight against communist North Vietnam. OPEC was also created in 1960, which means Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, is formed during meeting in Baghdad in Iraq. 1949 in Venezuela and Iraq approach Kuwait and Saudi Arabia in 1949 with the idea of forming an organization. September 10th, OPEC is formed in Baghdad. Iraq. Original OPEC members include Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. September 10th and September 14th, Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela meet in Baghdad to discuss ways to increase the price of crude oil. Over the next 30 years, OPEC used its own oil production as a political tool, including during the 1973 Arab-Israel War. Yom Kippur War, when OPEC placed an oil embargo on countries who were supporting Israel during the war. This caused more major problems with both the supply chain, causing gas rationing and quadrupling the price from $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel. OPEC has 12 member countries. 6 members in the Middle East include Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. And 2 in South America, Ecuador and Algeria, Angola, Libya, and Nigeria. And 2 in South America, Ecuador and Venezuela. As of 2010, OPEC members collectively hold 79% of world crude oil reserves and 44% of the world's crude oil and petroleum. As the changes happen in oil production, shift to alternative production technology, including the Alabaster oil sands in Canada, which are now the 3rd largest oil reserves in the world behind Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. The USA Pioneer 5 spacecraft. NASA launches the Pioneer 5 space probe on March 11th. The purpose of its mission was to travel between the orbits of Earth and Venus in order to gather information about deep space between 2 planets. The spacecraft measures the interplanetary magnetic field and gathered information about ionization and solar flare particles. It successfully completed its mission and stopped transmitting data back to Earth by April of that year. In June, Pioneer 5 was able to establish communications with Earth at a then record of 22.5 million miles away, but contact with the craft was lost after that point. Okay, so now we're going to speed over and we're going to talk about Civil Rights Act of 1960. President Dwight D. Eisenhower signs the Civil Rights Act of 1960 into law. On May 6, the purpose of the law was to choose loopholes from the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and dealt primarily with voter disfranchisement. The act created some penalties for anyone who tried to obstruct voter registration and extended the life of the Civil Rights Commission, which had been set to expire. It also established federal inspection of local voter registration polls in an effort to counteract discriminatory laws in the South that worked and disenfranchised voters on a racial basis. Now we're going to speak about Italy and Rome in Olympics. The Summer Olympiads was held in Rome, Italy. The Summer Olympics began in August with Rome as the host city. There were the first games to be fully covered on television. A total of 83 countries sent over 5,000 athletes to participate in the 150 sporting events. The Soviet Union, United States, and Italy won the most medals. These games were also notable because the city of Rome decided to restore and use some of the ancient sites to host certain events, providing a more interesting backdrop to these particular games. Switching over now, we're talking about JFK wins the presidential election. Democratic nominee John F. Kennedy wins the United States presidential election on Tuesday, November 8th, after defeating current Vice President Richard Nixon at the polls. Kennedy was the first Catholic and the youngest person to be elected at 43 years old. He was a Harvard-educated World War II veteran who came from one of the country's wealthiest families. He previously held office as a U.S. and senator for the state of Massachusetts. Kennedy became a wildly popular leader despite his narrow win against Nixon. As he faced tense situations and private and public drama during the early years of the Cold War, he was assassinated tragically in November of 1963. More about the Vietnam War. This is a timeline of the early history of Vietnam War. 1946, France reoccupies French Indochina following the end of World War II. 1946, the Viet Minh launched a rebellion against the French authority governing the colonies of French Indochina. In 1949, France officially recognized the independence of the state of Vietnam as an associated state within the French Union. 1949, the Vietnamese communists obtained outside support from Chairman Mao Zedong of China just across the border. 1950, the United States began to give military aid to France in the form of weaponry and military observers. Also in 1950, North Vietnam gained military aid, including arms and troops from China and the Soviet Union. From 1950 to 1954, North Vietnamese soldiers under the leadership of Vien Ngoc gained military supremacy over the South Vietnam and French troops. In 54, the Geneva Conference creates territorial integrity and sovereignty of Indochina and separated Vietnam into two zones, the northern zone to be governed by the Viet Minh, and the southern zone to be governed by the state of Vietnam. In 54, Vietnam was temporarily partitioned at the 17th parallel, creating a North and South Vietnam. From 58 to 60, North Vietnamese guerrilla incidents against South Vietnam increased gradually. In 1960, North Vietnam escalates military operations against South Vietnam. In 1960, also, the United States announces that 3,500 American soldiers are going to be sent to Vietnam. The Vietnam conflict had its history in the original French control of the region, which changed to the USA support following French withdrawal, together with distrust by both sides during the Cold War and successive U.S. presidents, starting with Dwight D. Eisenhower, believing in the domino theory, effect that if one country fell to communism, each country with borders would be more likely to fall. Combined with the financial and military backing of the Soviet Union and China of North Vietnam, over the next years, the war escalated on both sides, eventually ending in 73, when the U.S. pulled out of Vietnam following a North Vietnam victory. So that's a mouthful about the Vietnam. Okay, so now we're going to switch over a little bit. We're going to talk about some food shortages in East Germany. Following major food shortages in East Germany, 100,000 refugees crossed to West Germany. Nikita Khrushchev orders the construction of the Berlin Wall. North Ireland, the Irish Republican Army, also known as IRA, starts its fight against the British. South Africa, Sharpeville. African police opened fire with submachine guns on demonstrators on March 21st in the Black Township of Sharpeville, South Africa. Chile, one of the greatest earthquakes on record. Chile subduction fault. Ruptures from Talucho to Peninsula de Taeo, losing a tsunami and one against greatest earthquakes on record. USA, Gypsy Moth 11. Sir Francis Chichester arrives in New York aboard Gypsy Moth 11. He has made a record solo Atlantic crossing in just 40 days. Hurricane Donna. Does anybody remember Hurricane Donna of the 60s? Hurricane Donna forms on August 31st and battles the Caribbean and eastern United States until mid-September. American Heart Association links smoking to heart disease and death in middle-aged men. The UK, Princess Margaret. Princess Margaret marries Anthony Armstrong Jones. Cuba. Fidel Castro nationalizes everything. Fidel Castro nationalizes American oil, sugar, and other U.S. interests in Cuba. Sri Lanka, female prime minister. The world's first female prime minister is elected Miss Shamarivo Barnika Kalan in Sri Lanka. United States, Cassius Clay. In Louisville, Kentucky, Cassius Clay, who later took the name of Muhammad Ali, wins his first professional fight after having won the gold medal in Rome in the Olympic Games. Italy Olympics. The Summer Olympics are held in Rome, Italy. The U.S. Winter Olympic Games are held in Squaw Valley, California, United States. Togo independence. Togo gains independence from France. Central African Republic independence. Central African Republic gains independence from France. Morocco. The Algerian tidal wave. Remember the big tidal wave in Algeria and Morocco? It killed 12,000. Let's see. We got time for one more. Let me find one more good tidbit information. United States TROS 1. NASA launches TROS television infrared observation satellite. the nation's first weather satellite during April of 1960. It was launched from Cape Canaveral in Florida and was one of the world's first successful weather satellites. TROS-1 weighed about 270 pounds and measured 19 inches. Its height was 42 inches in diameter. The satellite could only function during daylight hours, but was able to transmit thousands of photos of cloud patterns and document the formation of cloud systems. And it was in use for about 70 days until it lost functionality. And that's your tidbit of your 1960s information from Tammie, signing off. Have a good day.